This is part 3 of the plant nutrition series. In the last lesson, we learned that plants are using two simple ingredients in their environment, water molecules and carbon dioxide molecules, to grow. They're not using large quantities of soil. With the work of Van Helmont, who argued that water was involved, Hales comes along and says it's not only water, and he gathers indirect evidence that there's something in the air that plants are using, and then Sachs comes along and says yes, in fact, if you plug up those stomata, the leaf will die. So the leaf has to effectively interact with the air for its survival. So at this stage, we have water molecules and carbon dioxide molecules are the substances with which plants use to grow. And how they're growing, they're building glucose molecules from these two simple molecules. And glucose molecules are very, very important molecules. They're energy molecules and building materials. And this chemical process will be called photosynthesis in a later lesson. So at this stage, that's what our understanding of plant growth. Now in this lesson, we're going to expand our view to see how plants and animals and other things like flames interact with the air, and that will shed more light on what plants are doing as they grow. We'll look at the work of Joseph Priestley and others. And Priestley was familiar with some simple observations that you might be familiar with. So for example, let's take a flame here. Here's a candle. And we've got a flame here, and we put the candle in a jar, and in time the flame goes out. Here we have a live mouse. We put a mouse in a jar. In time the mouse will go out as well. The mouse will suffocate and die. Now this observation suggests that perhaps the flame is using up something in the air that is necessary to support combustion. Maybe the mouse is using up something in the air that is necessary to sustain life, right? So the idea is that if you confine the volume of air, then the way that the mouse and the flame are interacting with that air is that both of them are somehow using up something that is necessary for flame or life. Here are some of these observations in this diagram. If we have a jar and we have a candle here, and the gas in there is just air, so we've simply sort of inverted a jar here, it's possible to light that candle. Now you might be asking, how do you light a candle that's inside a jar? Well, that was cleverly done using magnifying glasses. So you take a magnifying glass outside the jar, you focus the sun's light on the wick, and you can get enough heat to ignite the flame. You can do this if the gas inside the volume is air. But the candle will burn for a while and then it goes out, as we've just seen. Now take a look at the bottom one. Here's our case with the mouse. If this gas is air, the mouse will breathe for a while, called respiration, and then the mouse dies. Now in the middle, this was an interesting discovery. Chemists had discovered the liberation of a new gas that they called carbon dioxide from a certain chemical reaction. And they simply wondered whether this new gas, called carbon dioxide, was the same as air. Was air simply carbon dioxide gas? At this point in history, people didn't really know what air was. They knew it was a gas of some kind, but they didn't know if it was a pure gas or a mixture of gases. They just didn't know. So one candidate was maybe air was carbon dioxide. Well, one way to do that is to collect a volume of carbon dioxide in a chamber, have a candle there that is not lit, and then try to use your magnifying glass and light the candle. Try as they might, they could not light the candle. So that suggested that carbon dioxide gas is not the same as air. After all, you can light a candle if the gas is air. You cannot if it's simply pure CO2. So our reasoning looks like this. If carbon dioxide gas is the same as air and an attempt is made to light a candle in a vessel of carbon dioxide gas, then the candle should light. The result, candle will not light. Notice the result does not match the prediction interpretation. Carbon dioxide is not the same as air. So we have weakened our hypothesis. So at this stage then, we have this idea that the flame needs something in the air, but it's not CO2. The mouse needs something in the air, but it's not CO2. Well, what is that something? And are they the same? Or are they different? Are they competing for the same substance? Well, one way to approach this is to start taking some measurements. Let's say for the candle in a jar here, and this is air to begin with here, right? The candle will burn for 30 seconds and then it goes out. In the same volume of air, same jar, a mouse will suffocate in 10 minutes. Now, the fact that it takes different times for them to go out might suggest that, well, they must be using a different substance in the air because the times are different. But if we think a little bit more about that, it could still be that they're using the same substance, but they're just using it at different rates. Perhaps the flame is using up some substance in the air faster than the mouse is. So again, what we want is a way to figure out whether the mouse and the flame are using the same substance in the air. Perhaps that same substance is necessary for flame and for respiration. Well, one clever way to do this is to put the mouse and the flame in the same jar. Now think about that a second. Remember, we've recorded some numbers here. It takes 30 seconds for the flame to go out. It takes 10 minutes for the mouse to go out. If we put them together and they're competing for the same substance, then they should go out faster than if they were alone. We can see this in the reasoning. If the flame and mouse use the same substance in the air and we put the mouse and the flame in the same chamber, then they should both go out faster than when alone. The results are the same as predicted. In other words, that they go out faster than when alone. Therefore, since the results match the prediction, our hypothesis is supported. The flame and mouse compete for the same substance in the air. So if we look at it from the mouse's point of view, having that flame in there means that whatever that substance is in the air that the mouse needs, the flame is using up a lot of that stuff. So the mouse is going to die faster. Now in this picture we see our unfortunate test subject here, the mouse with the flame, and the results are that the mouse dies faster with the flame than without the flame. So the mouse and the flame are using up something in the air, and it's the same substance. It's just the flames seem to exhaust that substance faster than a live mouse. But this observation puzzled Priestley. Because think about this a second. If an animal can spoil its own air, can exhaust whatever it is that it needs for survival in a volume like this, in a jar like this, so it'll suffocate and die. But wait a second. How is it that animals are living on planet Earth? After all, the Earth's atmosphere is, in a sense, just a larger jar. It's a finite, it's a limited amount of atmosphere. So Priestley wondered, why aren't the animals all over the Earth, why aren't they spoiling their air permanently? Right? If animals in small chambers die because they're using up something in the air, why haven't, in the long history of life on Earth, why haven't all the animals spoiled the air? Well, Priestley is going to make an important discovery. He suspects that there must be something in the environment that is making the air fit again, that is unspoiling the air. Well, if animals spoil the air, perhaps plants are fixing the air. So here's his experimental approach here. He's going to start with a chamber, and it'll have a candle in it. And we know that if we light the candle and the candle will go out, then that air in there is unfit. It has been spoiled. So, candles and mice are going to be using up whatever was necessary for flame and life. So by simply burning the candle and then letting it go out, we have now spoiled the air. In fact, we'll be learning that what we've added to the air is more CO2 from the burning process, but we've used whatever that substance is that's critical for flame and life. But then what he's going to do is he's going to add a plant to this chamber. So we've got unfit air and add a plant. And he's going to wait days later, 10, 12, 14, 17, 20 days later, and now he's going to try to light the flame again. When he uses his magnifying glass, he finds that he can ignite the flame again. Remember, when the flame initially burns and then goes out, you cannot relight the flame. The flame has already exhausted whatever was necessary for flame. But if you wait for enough days the plant seems to be changing, he argued, changing the air inside the vessel. And it's fixing the air to the point where a candle can burn again. Now, the idea would be that if it fixes the air for a flame, it would be fixing the air for an animal as well, because the flame and the animal are using the same substance. So Priestley argued that he discovered what it was in nature that was fixing the air. Animals were constantly spoiling the air, but plants were fixing the air. Now, importantly, he had a control condition, and this was a chamber with no plant in it. And the reason for having this condition was he wanted to simply discover whether the air might be able to fix itself, right? So you light the flame, it will burn and then go out, so you have unfit air. Well, what about just letting that unfit air exist for a time, for the same number of days as he had in the experimental condition? Sure enough, at the end of that period of time, he tried to light that candle again, and it still would not light. So the air does not seem to fix itself, but this was important. You had to have a control condition. It was the plant, the presence of the plant, that seemed to be changing the air inside the chamber. It was a later chemist by the name of Lavoisier who finally understood that what the plants were doing was liberating a molecule called oxygen. So plants were liberating oxygen molecules, and it's the oxygen that was required for combustion and for life. So our final understanding then of what plants were doing here can be seen in this diagram here. Plants are building sugar molecules in a process called photosynthesis from two simple ingredients, water and carbon dioxide from the air. But in the process of doing this photosynthesis, they're liberating a gas back out into the atmosphere. That gas is oxygen. As it turns out, the oxygen is precisely what animals need to breathe, right, to survive. It's also what flames are using. And if you deprive a flame of oxygen, it cannot burn. If you deprive an animal of oxygen, it cannot survive. So plants and animals are linked in this gas exchange. Plants are producing a gas that animals need. Animals, it turns out, will be exhaling carbon dioxide, and that's precisely one of the starting materials that plants need to do their chemistry. This object over here is a self-contained ecosystem. It's fully enclosed. It's got water, there's some air, there are animals, and some algae down here. So the algae can do photosynthesis and make sugars and things, and the animals will eat the algae, and they are locked in this gas exchange, just as we see in this picture here. The only thing that this ecosystem needs is an external source of energy, and that's sunlight. And sunlight then is the last factor that we'll take a look at in our plant nutrition series.